Most people picture Saudi Arabia as oil and desert, a country that appeared fully formed sometime in the last century. They're looking at the wrong layer. Beneath the skylines and the highways, something much older is still standing. Tombs carved into sandstone cliffs 2,000 years ago, still intact. Rock art left by hands that predate every religion practiced here today. A mud brick capital that once ruled a kingdom, now slowly being uncovered from the sand. A desert so vast, it swallowed entire trade routes whole. This country didn't begin with oil. It began with frankincense, pilgrimage, and stone. 5,000 years of civilization buried under one of the most misunderstood places on Earth. Trip for You went looking for the layer nobody talks about. This is Saudi Arabia before the world decided what it was. Hegra sits quietly on the desert plain, where wind and time have shaped broad sandstone outcrops into natural markers. In Hegra, AlUla, Saudi Arabia, the horizon feels wide, but the details pull you in. Nearly 2,000 years ago, Nabataean builders turned this remote stop into a place of ceremony and status, tied to caravan routes across western Saudi Arabia. Their craftsmen worked with chisels and patience, not haste. Walk the site, and you notice how the tombs are not clustered like a city. They're spaced among isolated rocks, each one claiming its own silhouette. Many entrances carry carved inscriptions that name families, dates, and rules of respect. What stays with you is the precision of the rock-cut tomb facades, doorways and cornices carved straight into freestanding sandstone, as if architecture and cliff were always meant to be one. Elephant Rock sits on the open sand plain outside AlUla, its silhouette familiar at a glance, yet oddly personal up close. In this corner of Saudi Arabia, scale is measured by shadows as much as by distance. Here, wind and time have done the carving, working the sandstone grain by grain until an animal form suggests itself without any human hand. The surrounding boulders keep their own quiet shapes, as if the landscape is mid-conversation. Elephant Rock, AlUla, Saudi Arabia, lies within a region long traveled by caravan routes, where oases and rocky corridors guided movement across the desert. Not far away, the Nabataean tombs at Hegra hold their crisp facades in the same warm stone. By late afternoon, the light turns the sandstone from beige to amber, then to a muted rose. People gather at a respectful distance, letting silence fill the gaps between footsteps. What stays with you is the elephant itself, a natural arch with a distinct trunk-like pillar and a broad hollow beneath, a pocket of shade cut cleanly into the desert rock. Al-Balad, historic district located in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, is an extraordinary example of traditional Arabian architecture. Its narrow, winding streets and coral-built houses are a testament to the region's rich heritage, reflecting the cultural fusion of trade and craftsmanship over the centuries. Originally established as a bustling port in the Middle Ages, Al-Balad served as a gateway for trade and pilgrimage, linking the Red Sea to the ancient kingdoms of the Arabian Peninsula. This thriving commercial hub contributed to the development of unique architectural styles, blending Islamic, Indian, and African influences that characterize the district today. The district spans several blocks and features over 600 historical structures, many of which have stood for over 400 years. These age-old buildings showcase intricate woodwork and architectural designs, creating a visual narrative of Jeddah's legacy as a major trading center of the region. As you wander through the alleyways, one can sense the history that continues to resonate within these walls. The preservation efforts undertaken here highlight the importance of safeguarding cultural identity, of offering a glimpse into the lives of those who once thrived in this vibrant community. Jeddah Corniche stretches along the Red Sea with an easy, everyday rhythm, where early walkers share the path with fishermen, watching the light change on the water. In Jeddah Corniche, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, landscaped parks and open plazas make room for families, joggers, and quiet conversations, all framed by salt air and steady coastal wind. Public art appears without warning, abstract forms, polished stone, and playful silhouettes set against the sea like landmarks for people who live their lives outdoors after sunset. Near the water, the floating mosque, Al-Rahma, seems to hover at high tide, its pale surfaces catching the afternoon glare and the calmer tones of dusk. Farther along, views open to marinas and modern skylines, but the pace stays unhurried, shaped by shaded benches, seawalls, and long sightlines. Red Sea coral reefs line the Saudi shoreline in long, quiet bands of color just offshore. In places, the reef begins close enough that you can see its pale edges from a small boat on calm mornings. Along the Red Sea, coral reefs, Red Sea coast, Saudi Arabia, the water often stays strikingly clear because there are few rivers to cloud it with silt. Sunlight reaches deep, and the reef responds with layered structure, tables, branching thickets, and rounded mounds. Near Jeddah and north toward Yanbu, narrow channels cut through the coral, creating sheltered corridors for fish. Parrotfish scrape algae from the limestone surface, while damselfish defend tiny gardens no bigger than a dinner plate. Farther out, reefs form walls and drop-offs where the sea floor falls away and currents bring a steady exchange of nutrients. In lagoons and protected bays, young coral colonies take hold beside seagrass and occasional stands of coastal mangroves. The coastal climate is dry and hot, and the Red Sea runs warm and salty for much of the year. That stress shapes the community, favoring corals built for endurance rather than quick growth. What stays most distinctive here is the hard coral itself. Dense, sunlit formations persisting in unusually warm saline water just meters from Saudi Arabia's desert coast. Masjid al-Haram and Kaaba draw the eye inward toward a simple cube set within a vast, carefully ordered sanctuary. The scale is modern, yet the center remains intentionally plain. In Masjid al-Haram and Kaaba, Mecca, Saudi Arabia, white marble underfoot helps reflect heat and light, while wide courts and layered galleries keep movement steady. Even the sound feels managed. Footsteps, murmurs, and recitation softened by open space. Within these walls, pilgrimage is also logistics. Entrances timed, pathways guided, and staff watching for those who need water or a wheelchair. The city beyond Mecca may press close, but the sanctuary holds its own rhythm. Along the Sa'i corridor, the walk between Safa and Marwa becomes a measured passage rather than a scramble, lit evenly and kept cool. Nearby, the story of Zamzam is handled with quiet practicality through taps and cups, always replenished. And at the center, the Kaaba's black kiswa, heavy cloth, stitched with gold calligraphy, absorbs the glare and makes a single, dark plane that anchors everything around it. Abraj al-Bayt towers sit beside the grand mosque complex, built to hold the practical needs of millions who come to Mecca each year. In Abraj al-Bayt towers, Mecca, Saudi Arabia, the first impression is scale, but the daily rhythm is surprisingly ordinary. Elevators, checkpoints, quiet corridors, and families moving with purpose. Inside, hotel lobbies buffer the heat with chilled air and soft lighting, while staff manage constant arrivals timed around prayer and rest. A vast shopping level offers groceries, prayer garments, and simple meals, the kind of everyday logistics that keep a sacred city functioning without fanfare. Higher up, prayer spaces and sitting areas overlook the flowing courtyards, and where the white marble reflects afternoon glare and the movement becomes a steady pattern. The Clock Tower Museum adds a different texture: instruments, displays, and clean explanations of how timekeeping and astronomy shaped life in Saudi Arabia. From select windows, the Haram's geometry comes into view, and the city's surrounding hills sit in muted browns beyond the bright center. Even the building's soundscape changes with height, from crowded murmurs below to a thinner hush near the upper floors. Most distinctive is the colossal clock face itself, its illuminated numerals and green accents marking the hours above Mecca with an unmistakable, steady glow. Al-Masjid an-Nabawi holds Medina's day to a steady rhythm of footsteps, greetings, and measured silence. Its presence feels less like a monument and more like an organized breath within the city. In Al-Masjid an-Nabawi, Medina, Saudi Arabia, the courtyards open wide, and the marble underfoot stays cool even as the heat builds beyond the walls. People drift through shaded arcs, pausing where light softens and voices drop. Nearby streets move at a different tempo, with shop fronts and hotel lobbies folding into the pedestrian flow toward the gates. Farther out, the volcanic hills that ring Medina sit dark and still, a stark backdrop to the city's pale stone. Inside, symmetry does the quiet work, repeating columns, orderly lines, and patterned carpets that guide movement without pushing it. The air carries a gentle mix of prayer, cleaning water, and the faint sweetness of incense. What lingers most here is the field of giant shade umbrellas in the courtyards, unfolding into crisp, geometric canopies that temper the sun and turn open space into cool shelter. Kingdom Centre takes shape along Riyadh's broad avenues, a landmark that quickly becomes a point of orientation in the city's daily flow. Its clean lines hint at a modern capital still defining its rhythm. Inside Kingdom Centre, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, the atmosphere shifts from street heat to cool stone and polished glass. Shoppers move between familiar storefronts and quiet seating areas where conversation stays low. A small mosque tucked within the complex adds a measured pause to the pace of commerce. Nearby, elevators and escalators choreograph a steady circulation, carrying families, office workers, and visitors upward. From the higher levels, Riyadh appears in layers: dense neighborhoods, newer towers, and distant highways threading toward Diriyah and the edges of Wadi Hanifa. On clear days, the city's beige palette meets a pale horizon without much clutter. The building's interior design favors restraint, light, symmetry, and long sight lines that keep the experience calm. Even in busy hours, the space feels managed, as if sound has been softened on purpose. At the top, the most distinctive detail is the sky bridge, suspended across the tower's vast inverted arch. Framed by that open keyhole in the crown, the view becomes a quiet window over Riyadh's spread of streets and sand-toned rooftops. Al-Faisaliyah Center anchors a well-known stretch of Riyadh's Al-Ulaya district, where business hours, evening strolls, and family outings overlap in the same few blocks. Its geometry feels modern, yet carefully measured against the desert light. Inside Al-Faisaliyah Center, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, the atmosphere changes quickly. Cool air, polished stone, and a central void that draws your eyes upward. Sunlight arrives filtered through glass, softened into pale rectangles on the floor. At street level, the complex works like a small city. Offices with quiet lobbies, a hotel with muted corridors, and a mall that blends international brands with Saudi routines. You notice practical details, prayer spaces nearby, discreet signage, and seating arranged for unhurried conversation. Elevators lift visitors away from traffic into a calmer layer of Riyadh, where the city's grid becomes legible. From above, you can trace major boulevards outward toward older quarters and the greener line of Wadi Hanifa beyond the built-up edge. What stays with you isn't the height so much as the building's unusual crown, a glass globe held near the top like a lantern. At night, that suspended sphere glows softly, the most distinctive detail in an otherwise straight-line skyline. Boulevard Riyadh City sits in the heart of the capital's modern leisure district, built for walking, lingering, and watching the night unfold at an easy pace. In Boulevard Riyadh City, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, wide promenades thread between cafes, theaters, and open-air stages where families and friends drift from one soundscape to the next. The design feels intentionally comfortable for Riyadh's climate. Shade structures, planted edges, and breezeways that break up the heat without sealing you indoors. Digital facades and oversized screens add a second layer to the architecture, shifting colors and patterns so the same corner can look different from one hour to the next. Street performers and seasonal installations bring movement to the paths, while security and clear wayfinding keep the atmosphere orderly and relaxed. You notice how the city's new public life is choreographed here, spaces sized for crowds, yet still dotted with quieter pockets where conversation holds its own. And then there's the water, a long, calm lake running through the center, its fountain jets catching the light and turning reflections into the boulevard's signature scene. Masmak Fortress sits quietly in the old heart of Riyadh, its clay-colored walls holding the temperature down even when the streets outside feel bright and dry. At Masmak Fortress, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, the outline is plain and practical. Thick mud brick, sturdy corner towers, and narrow openings that once managed light and defense at the same time. Step through the entry passage and the sound changes, softened by packed earth and heavy masonry, while a simple courtyard gathers the air like a shaded cup. Inside, rooms laid out for storage, meetings, and watch duty show how a desert town organized itself before glass towers and wide boulevards defined modern Riyadh. Displays trace the turning points of the city and the wider Najd region, linking this fort to nearby historic neighborhoods and to Daria's earlier settlement pattern along the Wadi. Just beyond the walls, the old markets continue the rhythm of trade, spices, cloth, and metalwork, echoing the everyday life the fortress once protected. Most visitors linger at the massive wooden gate, where a jagged, time-worn opening marks the spot a spear once struck, leaving a scar you can still see at eye level. Rub al Khali lies across the southern reaches of Saudi Arabia as a wide, quiet expanse where distance is measured more by light and wind than by roads. Here in Rub al Khali, southern Saudi Arabia, the air often feels spare and dry, and the horizon keeps its secrets until the sun shifts and edges begin to show. From the outskirts near Najran province, travel narrows to tracks and waypoints, and towns such as Sharura become practical thresholds between daily life and open sand. The desert is not uniform. Gravel plains give way to soft basins, and salt flats appear in low places where rare moisture lingers just long enough to leave a pale crust. At Sheba, human presence is careful and compact. Facilities, airstrips, and a few straight lines laid across a landscape that quickly reasserts itself beyond the cleared ground. Even in harsh seasons, movement continues in small ways. A herder's route after a sparse rain, a vehicle's tires searching for firmer sand, a radio call carried across heat. What stays most distinctive is the dune architecture itself. Vast star dunes, their many arms meeting at a single high point, etched into sharp ridge lines that change subtly from one morning to the next. Jebel Firain sits at the edge of Saudi Arabia's central plateau, where limestone meets open sky and the land feels abruptly unfinished. The nickname Edge of the World makes sense, but the geology tells a quieter story. Here in Jebel Firain, Riyadh province, Saudi Arabia, the Tuwaiq escarpment shows layers laid down when this region was under an ancient sea. Wind and rare rain have worked those layers into steps, ledges, and long, clean faces of rock. From the top, the Najd spreads out in muted browns and greys, broken by dry channels that only carry water after storms. In the distance, small acacia trees and low shrubs gather where the ground holds a little more moisture. Closer to the cliffs, the surface changes underfoot. Hard crust, loose gravel, and sharp fragments that glitter briefly in the sun. Footpaths trace careful routes to viewpoints, and the air often carries a steady, dust-softened breeze. What stays with you is the escarpment itself, a long, sheer limestone drop that breaks the plateau in a single, decisive line, leaving the plain below looking impossibly wide and still. Diriyah at Turaif sits above Wadi Hanifa, where the desert light softens the edges of old walls and terraces. The air feels open here, but the ground holds a long, careful memory. In Diriyah at Turaif, Riyadh province, Saudi Arabia, the settlement's plan still reads clearly: lanes, courtyards, and fortified lines shaped for community and protection. Even in silence, you can sense how daily life once moved through these spaces. The architecture is Najdi at heart. Thick earthen walls, small openings, and shaded interiors designed for heat and privacy. It's practical building, but it carries a strong aesthetic, geometry, rhythm, and proportion without excess. Along the ridge, viewpoints open to the palm-lined wadi below, a natural corridor that helps sustain farming and travel. The contrast between cultivated green and surrounding sand is subtle, not sudden, and it feels lived in. Within the ruins, traces of governance and ceremony linger in the footprints of larger compounds and gathering areas. You can imagine voices under shade, negotiations over water, and the steady work of keeping a town running. What stays with you most is the honey-colored mud brick of At-Turaif's palace walls, layered and squared along the escarpment, holding warmth in the late-day light. Al-Murabba Historical Palace feels like a pause in Riyadh's fast rhythm, holding the steady proportions of Najdi design in earth-toned walls and measured corridors. Built in the 1930s for King Abdulaziz, it marked a shift from the older city core toward a newer Riyadh, while still relying on local materials and familiar construction. Inside Al-Murabba Historical Palace, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, rooms open one after another with a practical elegance, majlis spaces for receiving guests, quieter corners for family life, and stairways that guide the eye upward. Thick walls soften the desert heat, and small openings shape the daylight into narrow bands that drift across plaster and wood. Doors and ceiling beams carry the grain of palm and timber, worn smooth by use. The building's square plan keeps orientation simple. Movement is guided by right angles, shaded passages, and sudden pockets of brightness. Even in silence, the palace suggests how daily routines were organized: privacy, hospitality, and authority under one roof. Nearby, Riyadh's historical district adds context with museums and landscaped paths, but the palace remains intimate, more lived in than monumental. Its scale invites close attention rather than distance. What lingers most is the central courtyard, a calm, open square of shade and sun, where the light slowly slides along mud brick walls, cooling the air and steadying the pace. Al-Tayebat International City Museum holds its stories in a maze of rooms that feel more like a lived-in neighborhood than a gallery. Inside Al-Tayebat International City Museum, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia. The pace slows as you move from one doorway to the next. The building's Hijazi-style facades set the mood, and the collections follow with careful detail. Floors unfold into small chambers where labels are modest, and the objects do most of the talking. You'll see jewelry worked in gold, embroidered garments, and household tools worn smooth by use. Coins, handwritten pages, and trade items evoke Jeddah's long role as a Red Sea port and a gateway for travelers across the kingdom. Some displays lean into daily life: coffee pots, perfumes, and wooden chests, while others trace governance and learning through seals and scripts. The effect is intimate, less about grand timelines and more about how people kept order, faith, and family close. Regional rooms nod to the diversity within Saudi Arabia, shifting from coastal textures to inland patterns and mountain motifs. Without leaving the building, you sense how climate and craft shape what a home needs to be. Most distinctive, though, is the museum's carved wooden roshan, projecting lattice windows that soften the sun into patterned shade across the corridors. Al-Rahma Mosque sits along Jeddah's Corniche, where the Red Sea air softens the city's edges and the soundscape shifts from traffic to water and wind. Known widely as Al-Rahma Mosque, Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, it carries a clean, contemporary silhouette: white surfaces, restrained arches, and a dome that feels measured rather than ornate. Approaching on foot, you notice how the promenade invites unhurried movement: families pausing by the railings, fishermen scanning the surface, and seabirds tracing small circles above the shallows. Inside, the light does most of the decorating. Sun filters through patterned openings, breaking into soft geometry across carpets and walls, while the sea's brightness lingers even in the quietest corners. Jeddah's coastal humidity has a particular scent: salt, stone warmed by afternoon, and occasional sea spray, and it follows you here, mixing with the cool stillness of a sheltered prayer space. When the tide comes in, the mosque's base meets the water, and the structure appears to rest directly on the Red Sea, a floating effect created by its supports over the shoreline. Wadi Al Disah sits in a long, quiet corridor of stone in Saudi Arabia's northwest, where sound carries differently and distances feel closer than they look. In Wadi Al Disah, Tabuk province, Saudi Arabia, sandstone walls narrow and widen in slow rhythm, their surfaces softened by wind and rare rain. Light slides across the canyon floor and changes the colors by the minute. Travel here follows the logic of the valley. Gravel underfoot, occasional smooth bedrock, and faint tracks made by passing vehicles and livestock. Even in daylight, the cliffs create pockets of coolness that linger. Along the lower stretches, palms and reeds gather where moisture holds, and birds move between shade and open sky with quick, practical turns. The air can be dry, yet the ground tells a more complicated story. Not far away, the wider Tabuk region opens into plains and plateaus, but this canyon keeps its own small climate, sheltered from the harsher wind. The contrast is felt most clearly in the temperature under the rock. As the path bends, the scene becomes almost hushed. Stone, greenery, and a thin line of movement you can hear before you see it. What stays with you is the ribbon of clear water running between palms in the shadow of sheer sandstone cliffs. Rijal Al Heritage Village sits tucked along a mountain wadi where the air in Asir carries a cooler edge than much of Saudi Arabia. Its setting feels sheltered, shaped by water channels and stone. Here in Rijal Al Heritage Village, Asir Province, Saudi Arabia, paths thread between stacked homes and small courtyards. You notice how the village was built to hold close neighbors, livestock, harvests, and daily work. The surrounding hills show traces of terrace farming, cut into slopes to slow runoff and save soil. In season, mist softens the ridgelines, and the soundscape shifts from wind to birds and distant footsteps. Inside the old structures, thick walls keep rooms steady in temperature, even when the sun breaks through. Some houses now serve as small exhibits, holding tools, textiles, and photographs that map family life over generations. Down at the lanes, the village's rhythm feels measured rather than hurried. Stone steps, low doorways, and narrow passages guide movement the way the terrain always has. What stays with you most is the architecture. Tall, multi-story stone tower houses banded with white quartz and framed by bright, painted windows, a precise pattern repeated from wall to wall. Jabal Sawda holds a cooler, quieter mood than many travelers expect from Saudi Arabia. In the southwest highlands, Jabal Sawda, Asir province, Saudi Arabia, sits above the city of Abba, where the air thins and the light turns soft. Roads climb through folds of dark stone and steep drops, with pullouts that frame long views over the Asir ridgelines. On some days, clouds slide in at eye level, briefly hiding the contours before opening them again. Nearby villages keep older patterns in sight: stone houses, narrow lanes, and terraces cut into slopes that catch what rain they can. In places like Rijal Alma, the architecture feels built for altitude, weather, and patience. Asir National Park adds another layer, where birds and wild shrubs occupy the edges between rock and forest. And even the sounds change, trading traffic for wind and the dry rustle of leaves. The mountain is also a meeting point of climates inside Saudi Arabia, warm lowlands in the distance, and a high perch where evenings can turn unexpectedly brisk. It's a landscape shaped as much by moisture as by stone. Most distinctive of all is the band of juniper trees, their twisted trunks often beaded with mist, giving Jabal Sawda a rare, fog-silvered canopy. Al-Ahsa oasis stretches across a broad, low basin where desert and farmland meet in quiet, practical balance. In Al-Ahsa oasis, Eastern Province, Saudi Arabia, settlement has long followed the dependable logic of water and shade. In Al-Hufuf and Al-Mubaraz, old neighborhoods still show how daily life adapted to heat. Narrow lanes, inward courtyards, and walls built to hold the cool. Not far away, the mud brick forms of Ibrahim Palace recall an era when trade routes and local authority crossed paths. Beyond the towns, the oasis becomes an agricultural world of its own, dense with date palms and small fields stitched together by paths. At harvest time, roadside stalls turn the landscape into a map of varieties: soft, dry, amber, and dark, each with a local name and use. To the east, Jabal Kara offers a different kind of shelter, with caves where air moves and temperatures ease. The rock is close-grained and pale, and the passages feel shaped as much by time as by footsteps. Handicrafts, markets, and family farms keep the pace grounded, even as highways circle the edges of the Palm Belt. The contrast is not loud. It's simply how the region functions, day after day. What stays most distinctive is the oasis's living network of channels and springs, guiding groundwater into long shaded corridors of palms. In that steady flow, the desert's silence takes on a cooler tone. Jubbah rock art site draws you into a quieter chapter of northern Saudi Arabia, where sandstone faces have carried human marks for millennia. Here in Jubbah rock art site, Hale region, Saudi Arabia, the desert sits close to a long-vanished lake basin at the edge of the an-Nabawi sands. The landscape feels open, yet carefully bounded by rock and wind. Along these outcrops, scenes appear in patient lines: hunters with bows, dogs in pursuit, and herds that suggest a greener past. Some panels show cattle, others later camels, mapping changes in life and climate without a single spoken word. You also find inscriptions carved and recarved from early North Arabian scripts to later Arabic. Names, brief notes, and symbols stacked like layers of conversation across centuries. The site belongs to the UNESCO-listed rock art in the Hale region, alongside Shuwaimis. Yet Jubbah has its own rhythm. It is less about a single tableau and more about accumulation. Many hands returning to the same stone. In the heat, shade matters, and the rock provides it in narrow bands that shift by the hour. Fine grains in the sandstone make the carvings feel both durable and surprisingly delicate. Most distinctive is the sheer density of petroglyphs cut into these low sandstone outcrops, where pecked grooves catch the light and turn bare stone into a crowded archive.